I live in a small house in a decent neighborhood, and I also work from home. My office is set up upstairs in a small room with my desk positioned next to a window overlooking the front of the house. I used to love opening it, to get some fresh air or enjoy the view when the weather was nice. It was the beginning of autumn, so I kept the window open almost all day. On a regular weekday, around noon, I was working as usual at my desk when I noticed something through the window. A man was standing at the bottom of my driveway. He wasn't just passing by, tying his shoe or anything like that. He was just standing there looking at my house. I wasn't sure if he could see me through the window or not, but just a few seconds after I noticed him, he walked away. I thought it was really strange, but there was nothing I could do except go back to work. I glanced out the window occasionally, but when I saw nothing else unusual, I didn't think much of it. The next day, I was following the same routine, busy all day with several video calls with my colleagues. During one of these calls, my mind drifted for a moment, and I looked out the window. He was there again, standing in the same spot at the end of my driveway, staring at the house just like he had the day before. But this time it felt 10 times more unsettling. Why was he back? I must have been staring at him for too long because one of my coworkers noticed that I looked concerned and asked if I was okay. I said yes and tried to focus on the meeting, but I couldn't stop glancing outside. He stood there for a minute, and when I looked again, he was gone. The rest of the workday felt endless, and I couldn't stop thinking about that strange man staring at my house. After work, I stepped outside to my driveway and tried to figure out what he'd been looking at, but everything seemed normal. However, I did realize that my office window was completely visible from where he had been standing, which meant he had probably seen me looking at him too. I went back inside and made dinner. That night, I talked to my brother on the phone and told him what had happened. He agreed it was weird, but said it probably didn't mean anything. After the call, I sat down to watch TV, trying to distract myself from the whole thing. A few hours passed, and it was around 9 p.m. I lowered the TV volume because I was feeling tired, but as the sound faded, I could hear what sounded like footsteps outside my house. I sat up straight on the couch, staring at the front door. The footsteps grew closer, then stopped for a brief moment before moving away. I rushed to the door and looked through the peephole, barely catching sight of someone walking away toward the street. As soon as they disappeared, I opened the door immediately and noticed a note stuck to it. It was short, and it read, "Pat, open the door." I felt not just confused, but absolutely terrified. How did this person know my name? And what did the note even mean? They didn't even knock or wait to give me a chance to open the door, not that I would have anyway. That was enough to make me call the police. 2 officers arrived, and I told them everything that had happened, but unfortunately, there wasn't much they could do. They wrote everything down and told me that if anything else happened, I should call them again. That didn't bring me much comfort. That night, I lay awake in bed for hours, unable to sleep. I kept thinking about that man watching my house and the eerie note he had left. Then, just before 2 a.m., a knock on the front door shattered the eerie silence of the house. I froze. The silence inside was unbearable as I listened in fear. After a few seconds, the knocking came again. My heart started pounding, and I grabbed my phone to call 911. They told me the police were on their way, but the knocking continued the entire time. It was strange. It never got louder, faster, or more aggressive. It was just the same steady knocking over and over. The emergency operator told me the officers would arrive in 2 minutes, and right then the knocking started slowing down. There is a 15-second gap, then 30 seconds, then a full minute. When the police arrived, there was no one at the door. They were too late again. I told them what had happened, and this time they seemed to take it more seriously, but there still wasn't much they could do. They said they would patrol the neighborhood for a few weeks. Those weeks passed and the man never returned, or at least not that I saw. Now, months later, nothing else has happened, but the fear still lingers. Just thinking about that eerie note telling me to open the door and the knocking at 2 a.m. still sends chills down my spine. And what makes it worse is that the thought of him coming back still haunts me. I don't know what he wanted, who he was, or if he truly disappeared for good. That night, the house was engulfed in an unusual silence. I was alone, which was normal for me, but it had never been something that worried me. My parent had gone out for dinner with some friends, giving me a chance to enjoy some time to myself. I sat in my room at the back of the house, completely relaxed in front of my laptop screen, watching my favorite movie. Everything was fine, or at least that's what I thought. It was around 11 at night. I paused the movie for a moment to grab a snack. As usual, I had to pass through the glass door leading to the hallway, but for some reason I couldn't understand at first. I felt an invisible weight pulling me toward that door. It was just an odd feeling at first, but what happened next changed everything. As I approached the door, my attention was drawn to a mysterious reflection in the glass. Something like a white apparition moved quickly on the other side. I couldn't process what I had seen. I froze in place, and the calm I had been enjoying moments ago turned into a strange tension. The figure was white, but it wasn't just an ordinary reflection. I felt something unnatural, as if the entity itself was watching me. I tried to calm myself. Maybe it's just a reflection from the TV or some outside light, I thought. But when I looked again, I felt a shift in the air. It became colder, heavier on my chest. It was as if something was filling the space. Something unseen. Despite my fear, the strangeness of the situation pushed me to investigate. I slowly opened the door, my heart pounding as if I were about to confront something unknown. But the hallway was empty. Nothing but the usual shadows of the walls and furniture. Yet I couldn't shake the strong feeling that I wasn't alone. I went back to my room trying to ignore it, but I couldn't focus again. I tried convincing myself it was nothing but an illusion. I sent my mother a text telling her what had happened, hoping she would give me a reassuring explanation. Her reply came quickly. "Do you want us to leave dinner and come home?" I told her, "No, Mom, I'm fine. Enjoy your time." But the truth was, it was deeper than that. I felt like something was watching me, mocking my attempts to ignore it. I decided to check for myself, this time with more caution. Grabbing my phone, I turned on the flashlight and started walking around the house. I passed through the living room and kitchen, then went upstairs. I opened each door slowly, expecting to find something behind it, but everything seemed normal. Yet, even in that normal, something unseen was stirring in the space. I heard faint sounds, barely audible footsteps, as if someone was tiptoeing nearby. The sound seemed so close, but it disappeared every time I approached. When I reached the last room on the upper floor, the air felt even heavier. The silence was dense, pressing against my ears. It wasn't just about what I could see or hear. It was something greater than that. An overwhelming feeling that I was not alone and that whatever was watching me wasn't planning to reveal itself just yet. It was waiting for the right moment. That night carried a different feeling. A sense of gloom crept into the quiet corners of the house. I was 17 years old, alone at home on a Friday night. My parents had gone out for dinner, something I was used to, so I decided to spend my time playing video games in the living room. My loyal dog, Ellie, lay beside me, breathing slowly as he always did when he slept. Everything seemed normal, or so I thought. While I was engrossed in watching a movie, a faint sound like the creaking of wood came from the backyard. At first I ignored it, assuming it was just the wind. But the sounds persisted, and something about their rhythm made them feel unnatural. I paused the game, removed my headphones, and listened carefully. Suddenly, I saw Ellie lift his head, ears perked up, eyes fixed on the kitchen door. He sniffed the air anxiously, something I had never seen him do before. I tried to calm myself. Maybe a cat, I told myself, but my heart didn't believe it. The air felt colder, as if something was creeping through the walls. I tried to return to my game, but the sounds grew sharper. Soft footsteps, closer and closer, as if something was moving slowly but deliberately toward the house. Ellie let out a low growl, a sound that felt like a silent warning. A chill ran down my spine, and every part of me told me something was wrong. I stood up slowly, grabbed my phone, and turned on the flashlight, my eyes darting between the shadows that seemed to move on their own. I walked toward the kitchen door, careful not to break the silence, yet my footsteps sounded louder than usual. I cautiously opened the door and peeked into the backyard. It was eerily dark, and the wind carried whispers, as if unseen voices were speaking in the shadows. When I stepped back inside, the air in the house felt colder than it should have. The dim light in the living room seemed to flicker, and Ellie was still staring at something invisible to me. I was sure I wasn't alone, but the strangest thing of all was that feeling, as if eyes were watching me from the darkness. I tried to shake it off. I turned on the TV, playing anything that made noise to break the heavy silence. But even with the sound, the feeling of anticipation lingered. I decided to walk around the house to make sure everything was in place. Living room, kitchen, everything seemed normal. But as I climbed the stairs to the bedrooms, I felt an invisible weight pressing down on me. The air was charged with something I couldn't explain. I opened my parents' room, then my brother's. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But when I stood at the top of the staircase, I felt something behind me. I didn't turn immediately. I stood frozen, listening to my own rapid breathing. Finally, I gathered my courage and spun around quickly, but there was nothing, just darkness and silence. I returned to the living room and sat beside Ellie, who remained on high alert. I stayed awake the entire night, watching the shadows, trying to ignore the heavy feeling that lingered, as if something or someone had been there, watching but choosing not to reveal itself. That night carried something inexplicable, something that still sends shivers down my spine when I recall the details. I stood in the kitchen, searching for an explanation for the strange sounds creeping through the darkness from the backyard. Curiosity won over fear, and I slowly approached the window overlooking the yard, pushing aside the curtains. I didn't know what to expect, maybe a stray cat or a tree branch swaying in the wind. But what I saw was beyond any imagination. Under the dim glow of the streetlight, a strange man stood. His body was rigid, almost sculpted, and his face devoid of any expression. His eyes were fixed directly on me, a cold, unsettling gaze, as if he knew I would see him. He didn't move. He didn't blink. He was like a lifeless statue, yet his presence pulsed with danger. I felt my heart stop for a moment. I stood frozen, my breath heavy, my mind desperately trying to find an explanation. Maybe just a reflection, maybe a trick of the light. But then, suddenly, the man tilted his head ever so slightly, a movement barely noticeable but enough to trigger every alarm inside me. That small gesture was a confirmation that I wasn't imagining things. I didn't waste a second. I bolted to the bathroom, locking the door tightly. Ellie followed, scratching at the door urgently. I let him in and he sat beside me, both of us trapped in fear and silence. The only sound I could hear was the pounding of my heart and the echo of terror in my mind. With trembling hands, I grabbed my phone and called my parents. My voice was shaky, barely forming words. I begged them to come home immediately. They sensed the urgency in my voice and called the police on their way. Every minute felt like an eternity. The silence outside the bathroom was thick, almost alive. I didn't hear footsteps, but I could feel his presence lingering, watching, waiting. When I finally heard the sounds of police sirens and my parents arriving, a weight lifted off my chest. I rushed out of the bathroom and into my parents' arms, recounting everything as the officers listened. They searched everywhere, the yard, the house, even the surrounding area. But there was nothing. No man, no footprints, no evidence. After they left, we sat in the living room, my mother trying to comfort me. But deep inside I knew what I had seen. It wasn't an illusion. There had been a man standing under the light staring at me, as if waiting for the right moment for something. Since that night, everything changed. I could no longer stay home alone at night. Every little sound made me shudder, and every time I approached the window overlooking the backyard, I felt as if his eyes were still there, haunting me. It was real, yet at the same time it felt like a nightmare that refused to leave my memory. Hello, I am Jack. On a quiet night, I was lying on my bed trying to escape into the world of sleep when a muffled sound broke the silence. It was like a door opening and closing repeatedly, but in a faint and eerie manner. I thought the sound was coming from the hallway outside my apartment, so I decided to ignore it and closed my eyes, attempting to fall asleep again. But the sound grew louder, becoming clearer, as if it were creeping closer to my room. Then I heard footsteps, distinct footsteps coming from inside the apartment itself. I froze in place, my heart pounding wildly, my mind refusing to believe what I was hearing. I sat up in bed, trying to focus, hoping it was just my imagination or the noise of a drunken neighbor in the hallway, but everything felt real, and my little dog, who'd been sleeping in the corner of the room, started growling softly. It felt like drowning in a nightmare, where you can't move or scream. My dog's growl turned into sharp barking, and with every passing moment the fear grew heavier. Suddenly I heard a sound approaching my bedroom door. It was the sound of wood creaking, as if an invisible hand was touching the door and testing the handle. I held my breath, trying to convince myself that this wasn't real. But reality was far more terrifying than I had imagined. The handle slowly turned and the door creaked open slightly. I couldn't see anyone, just emptiness, the door moving as if someone were pushing it. My dog barked furiously, and all I could do was sit there, stunned. Then, as if an unseen hand had pulled it, the door shut again. I tried to convince myself it was just the wind or air pressure, but my heart told me otherwise. Something else was there, something far more dangerous. Suddenly the door burst open again, this time with more force. I felt my blood freeze. I had to move, to do something. With trembling hands I grabbed my phone and decided to call the police, but before I could dial the number, the footsteps stopped. Silence. A heavy silence, like the eerie calm before a storm. I remained in place, watching every movement, listening to every sound, while a dog stayed alert, his eyes fixed on the door. Finally, summoning what little courage I had left, I stepped out of the room slowly, using my phone as a source of light. The apartment looked normal, but near the entrance, I saw my bag overturned and drawers left open. It seemed like someone had been searching for something. I quickly locked all the doors and windows, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I called the police, but their response was shocking. They had other emergencies and wouldn't be able to arrive immediately. I felt trapped in a nightmare with no escape. I returned to my room, locked the door tightly, and sat on the floor beside my dog, trying to calm my racing breaths. When the police finally arrived, they searched the apartment thoroughly. They found no trace of anyone, no fingerprints, no footprints. They said it was probably a burglar who fled when he realized I was home. But deep inside, I knew the truth. It wasn't just a thief. It wasn't something normal. Since that night, sleep has never come easily. Every small sound, every whisper in the dark takes me back to that moment. The door handle slowly turning, the door swinging open with no one behind it. This place was once my safe haven, but now it has become the source of my endless nightmares. I never imagined that my home, which was supposed to be my safe haven, would turn into a place filled with fear and threats. The day started off completely normal. I was spending time with my little children while my partner was at work. Laughter filled the apartment, and everything seemed fine, until danger began to creep in quietly. At first, nothing seemed alarming. Faint noises in the hallway, a slight movement at the door, as if someone was trying to turn the handle. I tried to reassure myself. Maybe a neighbor made a mistake, or it was just the sound of the wind, but something deep inside me told me that something was wrong. As bedtime approached, my little daughter ran to the door, excitedly shouting, thinking her father had returned from work. I watched her from a distance as she struggled to reach the lower lock. But when she managed to open the door slightly, it wasn't her father standing behind it. There was a strange man, his face void of any expression, staring directly inside. My blood froze in my veins, as did my daughter, who suddenly stopped moving. Fortunately, the top lock was still fastened, preventing him from fully opening the door. In a flash, I ran toward it, pushed it shut with force, and locked it securely. My heartbeat pounded in my ears as I called my partner, my voice trembling as I told him what had happened. He tried to calm me down, saying he would come home immediately. But the thought of that man still being outside made me feel utterly helpless and terrified. Minutes later, things took a turn for the worse. Heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway outside our door, pacing back and forth, as if the person was waiting for the right moment to attack. I tried to hold myself together for my children, but every step felt like a dagger piercing my calm. Then, the sound of heavy breathing, strange whispers behind the door. It was overwhelming. Suddenly, the intercom buzzed. It was the building security guard asking if we were okay. He mentioned seeing suspicious individuals wandering around the building. I thought things would improve after that, but the night still held terrifying surprises for me. Around 3 in the morning, a loud noise woke us up. Someone was trying to force the door open, the handle twisting frantically, as if they were desperate to get inside. I took my children into the bedroom, locked the door, and tried to calm them while calling the police. Minutes felt like hours, and the knocking on the door nearly shattered my nerves. When the police finally arrived, the hallway was completely empty, as if this nightmare had been nothing but an illusion. But I knew it was real. Fear had invaded my life, and to this day I still live under the shadow of that night, watching the door, waiting, as if evil could become an unwelcome guest at any moment. I didn't know what to do when the police told me they couldn't do much beyond recommending better security measures. That left me feeling utterly powerless. That night, before dawn, I heard those same slow, heavy footsteps again, as if they were following me in the darkness. I lived in a constant state of anxiety. As days passed, the break-in attempts continued again and again without any clear pattern or warning. Some nights were quiet, but each time, something unsettling happened. My partner and I finally decided to install security cameras and reinforce the door, hoping that it would deter whoever was trying to get in. But what happened next was the opposite of what we expected. As soon as we had the cameras, the attempts became more aggressive. They would ring the doorbell in the middle of the night, pound on the door violently, then vanish before we could catch anything on the cameras. That night was the most terrifying of all. I was alone with the kids while my partner was working a night shift. Suddenly, I heard footsteps running in the hallway, loud banging on the door as if there was an emergency. My first instinct was to rush to open the door, but I froze. I remembered everything we had been through, and my feet turned into quicksand. The knocking continued, faster, stronger. When I looked through the peephole, I saw shadows moving behind the door, as if more than one person was there. I couldn't think clearly anymore. It felt as if time had stopped. Eventually, we realized we couldn't keep living like this. But my partner insisted that we were safe, that it was just troublemakers messing around. I wanted to believe that, but my fear was stronger than any promise of safety. As time passed, despite all the security measures we took, I still felt like something was watching us, a shadow lurking in every corner, observing our every move. And then suddenly, it all stopped, without any explanation. Yet that feeling of vulnerability never left me. It lingered even on quiet nights, like a faint shadow that never truly disappears. I'm sharing this story because I'm still trying to make sense of what happened. But the truth is, I've never been able to find a logical explanation for what we lived through.